Marco, Marco, Marco.
And they ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
I suppose since none of you in the audience are kind enough to play this game with me, that I'll just have to start my presentation. Many of you may be wondering why we play Marco Polo every summer in the pool. I mean, it's pretty random, just calling somebody's name back and forth. But actually, this dates all the way back to around 1280, when Marco was going on one of his first voyages with his father and his uncle. He got lost because he fell asleep on his horse and lost his way from them. So, eventually, after a while, his father and uncle started calling out Marco, and eventually Marco Polo figured it out, and he started calling back Polo, until the group of people finally found each other. Now, this may just be some scam by the internet, but we're Americans, so who cares? In 1254, Marco Polo was born in Venice, Italy, to his parents, Niccolo and Nicole Polo. They were a very wealthy family because they were merchants with silver and gold and many other things, which made it possible for him to have a very well-rounded education in English, math, and other subjects, which other children weren't able to have at the time. Unfortunately, early on in his life, his mother passed away, which made him have to be raised by extended family. Now, you in the audience may be asking yourselves, why didn't his father just raise him? But his father was actually busy traveling all the way to Kublai Khan's court in Beijing, China. While they were there trading, though, Kublai Khan became very interested in the religious parts of life, and so he requested that they go all the way back to Rome and then bring 100 priests and lots of holy water back to him on their way back. When they got back eventually back to Rome and Venice, Marco Polo was 15 years old, and when they left again to visit Kublai Khan, he was 17 years old. Now, since 100 priests is like a lot of priests, the Pope declined their offer, and so they were only able to bring 2 friars, as you can see below. Marco Polo actually ended up really loving Asia, and so he stayed there for 17 years. He learned the language, he immersed himself in the culture, and he just loved it there. But that meant that he started losing a lot of his Italian too, which would make it harder later to return back to Venice. Once him and his uncle and his father finally did want to return, Kublai Khan had one final request for them. He requested that they escort the Princess Mongol to Persia. It took 2 years to travel all the way to Persia, and 600 passengers died along the way. Once they finally arrived, only 17 people remained. But once they got there, the prince that she was supposed to marry was dead, which meant that they had to stay there even longer just to find her someone to marry off to. Once they finally returned, it had been a whole 24 years from when they'd first traveled to Beijing. They didn't get the warm welcome they were expecting, though. When they returned, there was a war going on with Genoa, and Marco Polo was put in charge of a Venetian ship. Unfortunately, soon after being on the ship, he was captured and taken to a Genovese prison. But this ended up being a good thing. He was able to share so much about his journeys and tell so many stories to the inmates around him. One of the inmates, Rusticello, became particularly interested, and he actually ended up documenting all of Marco Polo's journeys and voyages, which is why we have a book of them today. Eventually, in 1299, Marco Polo was released from prison, and he was able to go back to his regular life. This meant that he could get married to a wealthy merchant's daughter and have 3 daughters and a family of his own, something that he'd never had the chance to have before. He eventually died in 1324 at the age 69, which was very sad for his family, but they dealt with it. Christopher Columbus uses Marco's book as a guide in 1492, a whole over 100 years later. It just shows you that even when you have these things going on that aren't appreciated, they might be used in the future. I think it's so amazing that even though he wasn't very much appreciated in his time. Christopher Columbus ended up using his works in the future, which makes it all worth it. And so it's so great today because now we say his name every summer over and over again. And so I guess things worked out pretty well for him. Thank you.